Welcome to GESTA Mundi, where history comes alive. In the early morning hours of May 10, 1940, the eerie quiet that had settled over Western Europe was shattered forever. The German Wehrmacht finally unleashed its full fury upon the West. Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg were about to be swept away in a storm of steel and fire. The Battle of France had begun. In the early morning hours of May 10, 1940, the eerie quiet that had settled over Western Europe was shattered forever. After months of the phony war, a war of waiting and watching, the German Wehrmacht finally unleashed its full fury upon the West. The target was not France directly, but the small neutral nations that lay between Germany and the French border. Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg were about to be swept away in a storm of steel and fire. The Battle of France had begun. The German plan, codenamed Fall Gelb or Case Yellow, was a masterwork of military deception. The Germans wanted the Allies to believe that the main attack would come through Belgium, exactly as it had in World War I. The Allies, led by the French Commander-in-Chief General Maurice Gamelin, fell for the trap completely. The French army, the largest and most powerful in Europe, and the British Expeditionary Force, rushed forward into Belgium to meet the expected German thrust. But while the Allies advanced into Belgium, the real German attack was coming through a place the French thought was impassable. The Ardennes Forest, a dense, hilly region of narrow roads and thick woodland on the border of Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. The French had left the Ardennes lightly defended, protected only by second-rate reserve divisions. They believed that no army could move tanks through such difficult terrain. They were tragically mistaken. The German commander who would lead this daring plan was General Erich von Manstein, one of the greatest military minds of the war. Manstein had proposed a plan that was simple in concept but audacious in execution. The main German armored force, 7 panzer divisions, would smash through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River at Sedan, and then race for the English Channel. This would cut the Allied armies in two, trapping the best Allied troops in Belgium with their backs to the sea. While the armored spearhead prepared in the Ardennes, the Germans launched simultaneous assaults on the Netherlands and Belgium. The attack on the Netherlands was swift and devastating. German paratroopers, Fallschirmjäger, dropped from the sky to capture key bridges and airfields. The Dutch, who had remained neutral in World War I, were completely unprepared for modern airborne warfare. The Dutch armed forces numbered just 280,000 men, poorly equipped and inadequately trained. They had no tanks and only a handful of antiquated aircraft. The German Luftwaffe, fresh from its victories in Poland and Norway, dominated the skies. The Dutch fought with desperate courage, holding bridges and canals, but they were hopelessly outmatched. The German 18th Army, commanded by General George von Kuckler, swept into the country. The critical moment came on May 14. The Dutch defenders still held out in the center of the country, protected by water defenses and the fortified position of Fortress Holland. The Germans demanded surrender. When the Dutch refused, the Luftwaffe carried out a devastating bombing raid on Rotterdam. Over 90 German bombers appeared over the city center, dropping their bombs on civilian neighborhoods. Nearly 1,000 people were killed, and the historic city center was engulfed in flames. The bombing of Rotterdam broke Dutch resistance. The Dutch army surrendered on May 15, after just 5 days of fighting. Queen Wilhelmina and the Dutch government fled to London, establishing a government in exile. The Netherlands would endure 5 years of occupation. The Dutch had lost over 2,000 soldiers and nearly as many civilians. The quick fall of the Netherlands gave the Germans airfields and ports on the North Sea coast, threatening England itself. Simultaneously, the Germans launched their attack on Belgium. The Belgian army, 600,000 strong, was better prepared than the Dutch but still far outmatched. The Belgians had built a series of formidable fortifications, including the mighty Fort Emael, considered the most powerful fortress in the world. Built into a hill overlooking the Albert Canal, Emael had massive concrete bunkers, artillery turrets, and thick steel armor. It was believed to be impregnable. But the Germans had a secret weapon. On the night of May 10th, a small group of German glider-borne assault troops, just 85 men, landed silently on top of Fort Emael in DFS 230 gliders. They used new-shaped charge explosives to destroy the fortress's gun turrets and observation domes from above. The garrison of 1,200 men was trapped inside their own fortress, unable to bring their guns to bear. Within 24 hours, the mighty Emael had fallen. The capture of Emael was a military revolution. It proved that even the most powerful fortifications could be defeated by specialized troops using new tactics. The Albert Canal line was breached. The Belgian army fell back, trying to form a new defensive line. Meanwhile, the Allied armies, the British Expeditionary Force and the French First Army, were rushing forward to help. The Allied plan, the Dill Plan, called for the best French and British troops to advance into Belgium and form a defensive line along the Dill River. This is exactly what the Germans wanted. As the Allies moved forward, they were walking into a trap. The main German armored thrust through the Ardennes was already underway. While the Allies rushed northeast to help Belgium, the panzer divisions were cutting through the Ardennes behind them, heading for the French border at Sedan. By the evening of May 12, the German spearhead had reached the Meuse River near the French town of Sedan. This was the decisive moment of the campaign. If the French could hold the Meuse line, the German plan would fail. If the Germans could cross, France would be wide open. The French defenders at Sedan were the 55th and 71st Infantry Divisions, reserve units of mediocre quality. They faced three crack panzer divisions of General Heinz Guderian's 19 Corps. On the afternoon of May 13, the Germans launched one of the most concentrated air attacks in history. The Luftwaffe threw wave after wave of Stuka dive bombers and medium bombers against the French positions at Sedan. The bombing was terrifying in its intensity. French soldiers, many of whom had never been under fire before, broke and ran. The Stukas, with their screaming sirens, were designed specifically to cause panic. That evening, under cover of darkness, German assault troops crossed the Meuse in rubber boats. Despite heavy machine gun fire, they established a foothold on the west bank. German engineers worked through the night, building pontoon bridges for the tanks. By the morning of May 14, the 1st Panzers were crossing the Meuse. The Sedan bridgehead was established. The German armor was now on the French side of the river, and there was nothing in their path. The French attempted to counterattack. On the afternoon of May 14, French bombers, including the modern Leo 451s, attacked the pontoon bridges at Sedan. But they had no fighter escort, and the Luftwaffe shot them down in droves. Over 40 French bombers were destroyed. The French tank forces, including the heavy Char B-1 bis, attempted a counterattack near the village of Ston. The battle for Ston was one of the bloodiest of the campaign, with the village changing hands 17 times. But the French could not dislodge the Germans. Once across the Meuse, Guderian's panzers did not stop. They raced westward, following the principle of Blitzkrieg speed and surprise. The French were reeling, unable to form a new defensive line. German panzer columns advanced up to 40 miles a day, far faster than the French could move their troops. The roads of northern France were clogged with refugees, civilian men, women, and children fleeing the advancing Germans. The French High Command, led by General Gamelin, was paralyzed. Gamelin had no strategic reserves. His best troops were trapped in Belgium, and he had nothing to stop the German spearhead. On May 15, the French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud called the new British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. "We have been defeated," Reynaud said in despair. "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." Churchill flew to Paris and was shocked by the defeatism he found. The German advance was so fast that it created a crisis within the German command itself. The German commander-in-chief, General von Rundstedt, and even Hitler himself, grew nervous. They feared that the panzers were moving too fast, outrunning their supply lines and exposing their flanks. On May 17, Hitler ordered the panzers to halt, a brief pause that gave the Allies a precious moment of breathing space. But Guderian argued passionately to continue the advance, and Hitler relented. The panzers resumed their drive. On May 20, General Major Erwin Rommel's 7th Panzer Division reached the English Channel near the town of Abbeville. The Allied armies in Belgium were now completely cut off from the rest of France. The trap had snapped shut. The German panzer divisions now faced a choice. They could turn north and destroy the trapped Allied armies in Belgium, or they could turn south and complete the conquest of France. The decision was made to turn north. The panzer divisions, led by Guderian, Rommel, and Reinhardt, raced up the coast of the English Channel, capturing Boulogne and Calais. The British and French troops in the pocket were being squeezed into an ever-shrinking perimeter around the port of Dunkirk. The German advance was so rapid that the British Expeditionary Force barely had time to react. British soldiers, who had advanced into Belgium expecting to fight a defensive campaign, found themselves retreating under constant attack. The retreat was chaotic. Units became mixed up. Supply lines were severed. Morale plummeted. British soldiers fought desperate rearguard actions at towns like Arras and Lille. On May 21, the British launched a counterattack at Arras. 2 British infantry battalions, supported by 70 Matilda tanks, struck the flank of Rommel's 7th Panzer Division. The Matilda tank, heavily armored for its time, was almost invulnerable to standard German anti-tank guns. The attack caused panic among the German troops, and Rommel himself had to personally direct the defense. Rommel used 88mm anti-aircraft guns in a ground roll to stop the Matildas, a tactic that would become famous. The Arras counterattack was not strong enough to break through to the trapped armies, but it had a disproportionate effect. It frightened the German command, especially General von Rundstedt and Hitler. They worried that their armor was being drawn into a trap. On May 24, Hitler issued a controversial order that would become one of the most debated decisions of the war. He ordered the panzer divisions to halt their advance on Dunkirk. The German halt order gave the British and French a vital window of opportunity. The British Admiralty, led by Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay, had already begun planning an emergency evacuation from Dunkirk. The operation was codenamed Dynamo. The original plan was to evacuate perhaps 45,000 men over 2 days. In the end, the operation would rescue over 338,000. The evacuation fleet was an extraordinary collection of vessels. Royal Navy destroyers and transport ships formed the backbone, but they were joined by hundreds of little ships, fishing boats, pleasure craft, lifeboats, and private yachts. Civilians from all along the English south coast volunteered their boats, crossing the English Channel into the hell of Dunkirk. These little ships became a symbol of British defiance. The scene at Dunkirk was apocalyptic. The port was under constant Luftwaffe attack. Stukas screamed down on the beaches. Bombers pounded the harbor installations. Black smoke rose from burning oil tanks, covering the beach in a thick, acrid cloud. Thousands of soldiers waited in long lines on the beaches, stretching into the surf. They stood in water up to their shoulders, waiting for rescue. The British troops, known as the Old Contemptible's successors, showed remarkable discipline. Despite being bombed and strafed, despite the chaos and the fear, they queued patiently on the beaches. Soldiers formed makeshift jetties from abandoned trucks and equipment so that boats could tie up farther from shore. Some waded out to small boats, while others were pulled from the water by the heroic civilian sailors. The Royal Air Force played a crucial role in protecting the evacuation. While the soldiers on the beach felt abandoned, cursing the RAF, British Spitfires and Hurricanes were fighting desperately against the Luftwaffe over the Channel. The RAF claimed over 100 German aircraft shot down during the evacuation. Without the RAF's protection, the evacuation would have been a massacre. While the Miracle of Dunkirk unfolded, the battle for France continued. The Germans now turned their attention south. On June 5, the Germans launched Fall Rot, Case Red, the second phase of the invasion of France. With their best troops trapped or evacuated at Dunkirk, the French had barely 50 divisions to defend a front of over 300 miles. The Germans attacked with 140 divisions. The French defense was gallant but hopeless. General Maxime Weygand, who had replaced Gamelin, tried to form a defensive line along the Somme and Aisne rivers. But there were too few troops, too little equipment, and no air cover. In a series of costly battles, the Germans broke through. Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, now nicknamed the Ghost Division, raced across France, covering incredible distances. On June 10, with the Germans closing in on Paris, the French government fled to Tours and then to Bordeaux. Paris was declared an open city, meaning it would not be defended, to spare it from destruction. On June 14, German troops marched into Paris unopposed. They paraded down the Champs-Élysées, past the Arc de Triomphe, and formed up at the Place de la Concorde. The humiliation of France was complete. The defeat of France sent shockwaves around the world. The French army, considered the finest in Europe, had been defeated in just 6 weeks. Italy, seeing France on the verge of collapse, declared war on France and Britain on June 10. Mussolini, eager for territorial gains, launched an invasion of southern France. The Italian attack was a failure, but it added to the pressure on the collapsing French state. On June 16, the French government, now led by the aged World War I hero Marshal Philippe Pétain, asked for an armistice. Pétain, who had saved France at Verdun in 1916, would now preside over its surrender. He argued that further resistance was useless and would only cause more suffering. He would go on to lead the collaborationist Vichy regime. Hitler insisted that the armistice be signed in the same railway carriage in the Campine forest where Germany had surrendered in 1918. On June 22, 1940, in a deliberate act of revenge, Hitler sat in the same chair that Marshal Foch had occupied 22 years earlier. The French delegates, their faces etched with humiliation and grief, signed the document. France was divided into an occupied zone in the north and a collaborationist regime in the south. The terms of the armistice were harsh. 2/3 of France would be occupied by German forces. The French army was reduced to a token force. French prisoners of war, over 1.5 million men, would remain in captivity. The French were required to pay the costs of the occupation. But remarkably, the French Navy and the French colonial empire remained under French control, a crucial concession by Hitler. Meanwhile, the Dunkirk evacuation continued until June 4. By the time it ended, 338,226 British and French soldiers had been rescued. Churchill called it a miracle of deliverance, but he also warned that wars were not won by evacuations. The British had lost almost all their heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, and vehicles were left behind on the beaches of Dunkirk. The British Army would need years to rebuild. The fall of France was the greatest German victory of the war. In just 6 weeks, Hitler had achieved what the Kaiser had failed to achieve in 4 years of World War I. The mighty French Republic had fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had been driven from the continent. Hitler now dominated Europe from the Arctic to the Pyrenees. But the war was not over. Britain, under the determined leadership of Winston Churchill, refused to surrender. Churchill, who had become Prime Minister on the very day the German offensive began, rallied his nation. In his speech to Parliament on June 18, he declared that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth lasted for 1,000 years, men would still say, this was their finest hour. The Battle of France was over. The Battle of Britain was about to begin. Hitler now faced a choice. He could try to invade England, crossing the English Channel with his army. Or he could turn east, toward his true goal, the destruction of the Soviet Union. For the moment, he hoped that Britain would make peace. When Britain refused, Hitler would be forced to do what no one had done since William the Conqueror, launch an invasion across the Channel. The fall of France changed the world. It left Britain alone, standing against the Nazi tide. But Britain was not entirely alone. Across the Atlantic, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was determined to help. And in the shadows of occupied Europe, resistance movements were already beginning to form. The war was far from over. It was just entering its darkest and most dangerous phase. The story of that struggle, the Battle of Britain, the fight for the skies over England, is the story of our next episode. The France that fell in June 1940 was a nation in shock. The defeat was so sudden, so total, that the French people could scarcely comprehend it. 6 weeks had brought down the most powerful army in Europe. The German Blitzkrieg, with its panzer divisions and Stuka dive bombers, had revolutionized warfare. But the fall of France was not the end of the war. Far from it. Britain, protected by the English Channel and her Royal Air Force, prepared to fight alone. Join us next time for Episode 6, as we witness the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign to be fought entirely in the air, a battle that would decide the fate of the free world. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of GESTA Mundi.